Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I don't know if this counts as a step up or a step down in the context of controversy, but it involves the recent death of a man, so it is clearly a very serious subject. And it's also one which I'm curiously qualified to comment on. I refer to the horrible story involving a former guest on the Jeremy Kyle programme who has died of a drug overdose days after failing a lie detector test on the programme. I mean, you can make your own conclusions. One newspaper reports that Powell's fear Steve took his own life. This is incredibly sensitive. It's a horrible story. And it's one that has seen ITV react by pulling the entire show and all past episodes from their ITV player facility.
There are calls for ITV's Jeremy Kyle show to be taken off air for good after the death of a participant. Steve Diamond died days after failing a lie detector test on the programme, which was never broadcast. The show, which has been described as car crash TV by an MP on the Commons Media Committee, is known for its often confrontational style.
Now, ITV has defended the Jeremy Kyle show over the support and care it gives to its guests. The programme has been suspended pending investigations after the death of Stephen Diamond, a week after he appeared on the show. MPs have called for the programme to remain off air for good, and today ITV bosses have been meeting in Salford to discuss its future.
MPs have joined calls for the Jeremy Kyle show to be taken off air for good after the death of a man shortly after he appeared on the programme. Stephen Diamond was found dead last week following a recording. Police said his death was not being treated as suspicious. In an internal email, the ITV boss, Dame Caroline McCall, said the decision to suspend the show was the best way to protect it and its staff. But Downing Street said broadcasters and production companies had a responsibility towards the mental health and well-being of participants and viewers. Anya Pop has this report.
It's been a staple of daytime television for the last 14 years.
I've got rattles. Sit down!
The Jeremy Kyle show exposes bust-ups, breakups and occasional make-ups to a live audience who clap and boo along. But now ITV has suspended filming and are under pressure to cancel it altogether after the death of a man who had recently appeared on the programme. Steve Diamond was on the show at the beginning of May, desperate to prove to his fiancée that he hadn't been unfaithful. But the couple split up after he failed the show's famous lie detector test. A week later, he was found dead. His on-off fiancée spoke to the Sun newspaper.
I was still with him for 2 years. He was still my fiancé. I still loved him. As much as he was a pig to me, I still loved him. I'm over him a minute to me. And be alive and be dead.
Miss Callaghan said the show's aftercare was good, but we've spoken with someone who worked on the programme 13 years ago who paints a different picture.
They're picking on a certain level and a type of class of people to get them onto the show, to actually expose them and make it a giggle. When the guests come out, they just gone in for each other. They kept separately, they kept away separately, and then obviously it's the argument that comes out straight away on stage.
We also spoke with a senior researcher who'd worked on the programme more recently. He said he was surprised something like this hadn't happened sooner. He told us he'd witnessed guests being deliberately riled before they went on the programme. And of the aftercare system, he said it was to give the appearance of diligence, but in his view was merely to facilitate the programme. And of mental health issues, he said it didn't matter if they had a serious one, it wasn't always a red line, and that they would, in his view, find a way around it.
Billy Joe Newington appeared on Jeremy Kyle in 2009. He said he applied in desperation to help after a family dispute.
So, just after I got to the studios, me and my mum were separated into different rooms, and they spent the next 5 or 6 hours basically trying to really agitate me and wind me up, ready to go on stage, and I'm fairly certain they did the same to my mum as well.
He now feels he was naive and regrets appearing on the show. Steve Diamond's death is not the first time ITV has been in hot water about the way they look after people who have been on their shows. In the last year, 2 former contestants of the reality show Love Island have taken their own lives. This latest death has raised further questions over putting vulnerable people in the spotlight.
It might be someone who is exposed in some awful way and made to be a laughingstock or open for public mockery, and being totally unprepared to deal with and cope with that. And that's why I think the people that make these shows do have a responsibility and a duty of care towards the people who are on them.
In a statement, ITV told us,
"The programme has significant and detailed duty of care processes in place for contributors pre, during and post-show, which have been built up over 14 years. The guest welfare team consists of 4 members of staff, 1 consultant psychotherapist and 3 mental health nurses."
What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do?
ITV has taken the Jeremy Kyle Show off their catch-up service for now. In an email to staff, the boss of ITV said suspending the programme was the best way to protect the show from the reaction after this death. But there's now bigger questions than the survival of this show, about the aftercare given to those that go on programmes like this.
Well, joining me now is Alex Reid, an MMA fighter who appeared on the Jeremy Kyle Show in 2012, a move he says he now regrets. And you've done lots of sort of reality TV over the years. You won Big Brother. Why do you regret this? What was wrong with it?
I always wanted to be famous, but for having accomplished something. I'm an actor and a martial artist, and I trained diligently. I love the clap of a crowd, the cheer of an audience, but to be known for salacious sex acts and craziness like that, that's not what I signed up for. But I was congealed. I take responsibility. I went in there, you know, but my gut, I didn't listen to my gut. I was listening to sycophantic agents, PR gurus, specialists who were saying, look, you're in a big pile of doggy doo-doo. You need to do this, you need to do this. I'm like, oh, what should I do? Yeah, you're right, I need to listen to the experts. And then guess what? You end up in more poo. Excuse my language.
Obviously, they would treat their celebrity guests differently to ordinary members of the public. But did you get any counselling or advice or help before or after?
Well, I mean, to his credit, Jeremy was actually quite pleasant. And I said, trying to be airs and graces, I'm not going to do it in the audience. So I did it away from the audience. But still, as good as the interview was, the stigmatisation that Jeremy Kyle gets, because so I'm an actor. In acting, life is boring, but in acting, you pick scenes which are high drama. It's not acting, but you're pitching the most high drama scenes from people's lives and pouring the petrol on it and creating an explosion. So for me, they were talking about my life and I'm like, is this really going to benefit me?
I mean, ultimately, the public are the consumers and they're watching it enough, presumably, for ITV to make money out of it.
Yeah.
And other channels with similar shows. It's not the only one. Do you think it's time to call time on all of these types of shows?
There's Mike Falassis, I think I got his name right. He just committed suicide. I've lost 3 very dear friends in the same age bracket. And what I've noticed in today's modern society, I go around the country talking to kids, motivational speaking. They want to be celebrities. Kids are looking for outside acceptance. They don't accept themselves. And these sort of programs aren't helping. I think a program like Jeremy Kyle has the ability to turn it on its head and if it has major reforms, it could do so much good. There's programs like Ellie, the lesbian lady in America. It's a slightly different show. There's a black gentleman, a bit like Oprah Winfrey, who does the same sort of thing in America. He could do something like that, and it could be fabulous. And it could be really good for society.
Alex Reid, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Well, earlier, I spoke to the writer and broadcaster John Ronson. Now, for his book on psychopaths, he spoke to a researcher on a daytime talk show, not Jeremy Kyle, but similar in format. And I asked him what he learned from that researcher about how guests are chosen.
She told me that she had a secret trick that she would utilise when deciding which guests to book. This wasn't a trick that came down from on high. It was one that she had devised herself, but it certainly came from the febrile, atmosphere in these rooms. And her trick was that she would ask the prospective guests what medication they were on. And if it was a medication for something, she said, scary sounding, like lithium, she wouldn't have them on because she doesn't want them to, go on show and then go off and then kill themselves. She said, but if they said that they were on a medication for something like Prozac, she said that's perfect. Because that implies exactly the right sort of mental illness to be entertaining for the daytime television viewers, meaning that, you know, they're angry and upset. But he said, you don't want actual exploitation, you want smoke and mirrors exploitation. So that was her secret trick.
So it was a really exploitative setup that she was describing.
She said that, okay, so if there are no medication at all, that means either we shouldn't have them on because they're not being treated.
Because they'll be boring.
Yeah, or boring or too crazy, like one or the other. Do you see what I mean? But yes, extremely manipulative.
You haven't said what show this was, and you're not going to, but it's one of these types of shows.
Yes.
In Britain.
Yes.
What do you think it says about us as a consuming audience that we want this type of show?
Well, one way to look at it could be that we're all afraid that we have damage, and some people are ashamed by that, and so they want to see people who are more damaged than they are on television to make themselves feel better about themselves. I mean, I obviously think it's a terrible thing, because it's everything that I hate about the way we view other people, which is to demonize people, to humiliate them, to make their damage seem funny or abhorrent.
Do you think this kind of conflict on television about personal situations is of its time? You know, that reflects the way we deal with everything else in society, whether it's politics or life, or is it something that's had its time?
I think some aspects of it has had its time. I mean, one of the best bits of progress for me as somebody who's interested in mental health is just how much more destigmatized mental health is nowadays. So, you know, I'm doing a live tour at the moment where I'm actually talking about my own mental health issues on stage, which is something I've never done before except for as a joke. And that's part of the destigmatization of mental health issues. So I think shows like Jeremy Kyle are very much behind the time about stigmatizing mental health.
Do you think the conflict element of this is being also fed by the news, by what we do, the way we set it up?
Well, I have mixed feelings about that because, you know, you're very good at being adversarial. You know, when you're doing that to a politician, you know, fine, the gloves are off. I mean, that's what it should be. I think there's a danger in taking that sort of adversarial approach to all sorts of things. And I think that's where adversarial journalism kind of goes wrong. I remember the playwright Graham Linehan was on BBC's Today programme plugging a show he had done about the lady killers. He was doing like a stage show based on the lady killers. And they brought on somebody who was you know, just opposed to stage shows based on movies. And so this, what would have, you know, and they all started yelling at each other. And I think that's where adversarial journalism just becomes like stupid. If we are in an adversarial media system, we should be very aware of when it's appropriate to be like that and when it's not appropriate to be like that.
John Ronson, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And maybe it's not a tricky one, actually, for you. 0345 606 0973 is the number you know. I know the production process on the Jeremy Kyle programme quite well. I work very closely in Salford, in Manchester, with the team that make it. And I also, by complete coincidence, used to work in the studio next door to where they filmed its predecessor in Norwich. Jeremy Kyle replaced Trisha, which was a slightly different beast. And I remember Trisha wasn't that much different. I think Jeremy Kyle became Trisha squared. You also have to remember that I've been on the radio every morning pretty much for the last decade and a half, and that is precisely the point in the day at which Jeremy Kyle is on. You occasionally stumble across some repeats at 4 o'clock in the morning if you've come in from a hard night's charity work, then you might accidentally stumble across it at 4 o'clock in the morning. But generally speaking, you choose between me or Jeremy Kyle. It's like peas in a pod, really. Some mornings, free-range bananas. The point being that I know a little bit about the programme, and I often giggle when I walk past. It's still on sometimes, but no, it must be before I come on air. And you see some phrases on the screen, the questions that are being posed, that are frankly staggering. Like, did my dad impregnate my wife or something like that? And you just think, good grief. It's quite Hogarthian in its concept, although I can't imagine anyone involved in conceiving it ever drew parallels with William Hogarth. But you know, when Hogarth does his etchings of relative debauchery, it was to entertain a middle-class crowd. So Gin Lane, for example, where there's the famous detail in the corner of the woman who's so befuddled by gin that she's dropped her baby, and there's all sorts of horrible scenes there. And Hogarth would do these etchings and put them up. I think, did he give that one to the Foundling Museum in near Russell Square down? I don't know, but they would be patronised by middle class patrons and customers. You're going to see the Harlot's Progress or the Rake's Progress or Gin Lane. There's always been, and Dickens does it a little bit as well, grotesques you could call them, although this is in the context of fiction. We've always, in this country, and I don't think it's unique to the United Kingdom, we've always served up grotesque scenarios for the amusement of others. I don't know whether or not that amounts to a defence of what the programme does, but I do know this. When we lived and worked in Norwich, and they were filming Trisha Next Door, and we all socialised together, and they were a great bunch, and the question that I always asked them was, why do people go on the programme? Because it almost always involves some form of humiliation or some form of ritual shame. There's a revelation involved that at least one person on the stage is going to be absolutely destroyed by. There's violence and vulgarity and all the sort of things that that people like me, because we live in a metropolitan liberal bubble, don't realise should be taken very, very seriously and treated as legitimate. And the answer I got was fame. So make of that what you will. The answer I got, there are a couple of stories I can probably share with you now, because it's nearly 20 years ago that we did it. And those stories involve the minicab drivers that used to take the Trisha guests back to their homes. Two stick in my mind. One's a little bit fruity, so if you're of a delicate disposition, look away from your radio now. The other, I'm afraid, just speak to the kind of freak show element of what the programme sometimes involves. When a taxi driver was taking me somewhere in Norwich and was telling me, you'll never guess what happened to me the other day, and he told me a story about somebody who had no socks. He had no socks, and the taxi driver said to him, "Why don't you have any socks on? Did they get wet?" He goes, I haven't got any socks. Just didn't own a pair of socks. And the taxi driver drove him home to Wales. I remember it was an estate just outside Cardiff. And this is in the days before sat-nav, remember, so he's doing it with a paper map. And he gets about 4 or 5 streets away from where this lad lives. And he says, "Where do I go now?" And the lad didn't know. His universe was pretty much 3 or 4 streets. Maybe he caught a bus somewhere, but I just remember being struck by that. The other story involved an episode of Trisha that focused upon nymphomania and a taxi driver who had to drive a nymphomaniac back to Stockport from Norwich. But I'll leave you to fill in the gaps on the story that he told me. Sadly came as a great shock to this sheltered young man. But I mention that because it's very easy to be snobbish about this. And I think we're almost encouraged to be a bit snobbish. I am shocked at the thought of someone not owning a pair of socks or being able to find their way home from 5 streets away. But I've been doing this job for a long time now, and I'm frequently shocked by my fellow man and woman and the difference, the gulf between their worldview and mine. This gentleman, Steve Diamond, who has died at the age of 63, did everything voluntarily. There are checks and balances in place. In fact, if you read the coverage in The Sun, the landlady who found him after he passed away stresses that the production company had been in touch frequently to make sure he was okay. There are astonishing checks and balances in place. He was poorly, it seems, severe arthritis, but he'd stopped taking his morphine in case it affected the lie detector test. He couldn't wait to get on air. By all accounts, his ex-partner, who I think was the subject of the fidelity that was being questioned by the lie detector test, must just be broken. But there is a call now for these people not to be exploited, and I'm fascinated by this question. I don't watch it a lot, so if you do, then educate me and illuminate me, but I think we've all got a fair idea how it works. If they want to do it, if these people want to do it, that's why I mentioned Fame. I used to say to the Trisha producers, why do they do it? Why do they do it? And they go, mate, you've got no idea. They won't pay for a drink for 6 months in their local when they go home. They won't pay for 2 years, 3 years, they'll be that bloke off Trisha or that woman off Trisha. And I don't believe that or understand it, but that's what the people who worked on the programme said, and the Jeremy Kyle production crew very much evolved from the Trisha production crew when the programme contract changed. And I just want to know what you think about that line between personal freedom and protection. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I look forward to talking to you about this one. An appalling story, but one born of a television entertainment programme that puts people's private business, their dirty laundry, on public display. No one is forced or compelled to do it. And the big shock I had when I worked in the studio next door to a precursor to the Jeremy Kyle programme was that it's a form of fame. It's a 15 minutes. Remember, this is before reality TV went huge. This format was established. Think of Jerry Springer in America. And it was a sort of cross between bear baiting and gossip. So how much blame does the programme bear if people who've appeared on it end up regretting their appearance to, I don't know, well, a huge degree? Let's just leave it at that. You understand why. Let's keep it grown up. Patrick's in Shepherd's Bush. Patrick, what can you tell us?
Oh, hi, James. Well, I work as a psychotherapist, and I regularly treat people with suicidal thoughts, so ideation. I have watched the Jeremy Kyle programme a couple of times for about 20 minutes before it becomes unbearable. My core point is that people have to be protected from themselves. If, as you said, the staff actually say the reason they come on to be humiliated so often is because of fame, then they need to be protected even more, because what they're seeking is a kind of a Persian magic carpet ride out of the misery that they're suffering. And what I think is linked to that is the kind of po-faced editorial public interest hypocrisy.
I don't think that they do that? Do they claim public interest? I mean, I did specifically stressed a moment ago that it's an entertainment programme. It certainly doesn't come out of the current affairs department.
Well, yeah, that's a fair point. It probably isn't actually the phrase public interest that's used, but there is an undertow of the programme that there's some sort of efficacy to it. You know, there'd be some sort of catharsis or public working out of issues to the benefit of everybody concerned. What they don't sell themselves out is, well, this is modern day bear baiting.
But I mean, it's not, is it? And I use that phrase myself, so I'm not going to criticise you for using it. But the Bears had no choice.
Yeah, but again, there's choice and choice.
Well, that's what I want you to elaborate upon for me, because.
Well, if people are living in a very restricted way, I'd say because of mental health issues as well as
they are very, very careful about that. In my experience, which is, you know, not inconsiderable, as John Major might have said.
Yes. Well, I just say, almost by definition, though, if somebody has got a major personal issue of the extreme kind that the Jeremy Kyle programme tends to portray, and if they say to the people who are no doubt trying to, look after them and support them, that the reason they're going on is because of the fame, then they need to be protected from themselves. Because that is a dangerous situation.
But how do you decide who needs to be protected from themselves?
Well, no, I think I'm actually with ITV now. I think actually you think this is a terrible tragedy.
Yes.
It's sort of the distillation of where we may well have been running risks before, and that's it. It's had its time. Ever since Prince William and Andrew Harry have done such brilliant headline work on mental health awareness down. Even law firms now have partners whose remit is to look after mental health. That would have been unheard of even 3 years ago.
Not on the Jeremy Kyle show. They have Graham, who's on screen. No, he's trained like you are. I appreciate he's pursuing a slightly different path in the realms of counselling and similar, but he does, and he's a professional. I've met him. So they do that, and that's been in place since the very beginning. Sources close to Jeremy Kyle and his team have told The Sun that they don't believe there is any link between the show and this death, but I suppose we can file that under they would say that, wouldn't they?
I think so.
But I just want, and it may be that I'm tilting at a windmill here, but what would be the line below which or above which you shouldn't be allowed to go on the programme that you really want to go on? Because that's the other thing that comes from this story, is how much he was looking forward to it.
I'm sure he was. It would have been a kind of golden feeling relief. But as I said, the people need to be protected from themselves.
But who needs... I don't need... You, presumably you don't need to be protected. If you want to go on the Jeremy Kyle programme, you think you should be able to. So who needs to be protected?
Well, people who haven't been properly assessed. I mean, I don't know what the assessment procedure is.
Well, I do, you see.
You've got to be... When somebody comes at you with suicidal thoughts, and they're much more common than people probably imagine, you've got to be really, really careful how you tread to make a proper assessment as to whether...
But you know as well as I do that there will always be one that gets away. So I might present to you as being utterly cheerful and happy, but inside I'm weeping, and I desperately, desperately want to go on this programme. You're not going to know that I shouldn't go on it. Unless I tell you, unless I give you the reasons effectively why I shouldn't go on it, but I'm not going to do that because I'm desperate to go on it. I'm not being obtuse in this. I'm being genuinely honest.
I hear where you're coming from. It's just that my kind of clinical perspective would be, given the format of the show and the way it's set up, that is not a healthy environment for somebody who is vulnerable in the broader sense.
But then how do we decide who's vulnerable? Although, I mean, I can appreciate if you say we can't, it's too hard to do, so we've got to abolish the whole programme. But presumably thousands and thousands of people have been on this show over the years.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say anything crass or stupid, but I am going to say they really, really, really want to go on it. How would you choose the ones who really, really want to go on it, who shouldn't be allowed to go on it?
Well, I think the short but kind of crude answer is you can't.
Well, that's my point, I think.
And as I say, if this terrible tragedy has happened, they may be fortunate it hasn't happened earlier.
They may be. They may be. There have been controversial moments, certainly. There have been difficult discoveries. There was a particularly unpleasant experience for two gay lovers who found out they were brothers after hooking up on a dating website. I mean, this kind of stuff could be incredibly traumatic, incredibly traumatizing for people. They do have a crack team of professionals in place. They genuinely do. I know that because I've worked in the same studios. But Patrick's right. Eventually, we both get led to the conclusion that you can't make it watertight. And that might be an argument for cancelling the whole show, or it might be an argument against cancelling the whole show. I don't know which. Sam's in Madrid. Sam, what would you like to say?
Hi. Yeah, mainly I was just going to go back to the question that had been raised about what would possess people to go on this kind of show.
Yes.
And just to say that I'm a clinical psychologist, and so loads of views on the last conversation you just had, but I'm going to dive past them just to say that my understanding has always been that in terms of the original format for this kind of show...
Yes.
Like
we came from America, didn't it?
If you go back to Jerry Springer...
Yes.
Their rationale for this kind of format of the show, and which does hold true clinically, is that for some people, if they do have a big secret to share, that they're having an affair, that the father of their child is not who everyone thought they were, that they're transsexual, whatever it is sometimes easier and safer for people to share in front of an audience than it ever would be just sitting across a table from your loved ones.
Is it a similar psychological phenomenon to people phoning me to tell me stuff that they haven't told their loved ones? We don't do it for entertainment, obviously, and they do, but I guess it's hard to draw the line between the two. People will tell me stuff that happened to them when they were young, and on a few occasions they've said, we've never told anybody else this before, because it's easier to do it in that context.
Yeah, it's safer. I mean, I think the main difference here is that your show does provide a greater degree of anonymity to share that kind of information.
Of course, yes.
Whereas on a televised show, it is all out there. But the difference is that on those televised kind of shows, it's more about the actual being within a crowd and doing it within that context.
Right. Yes.
That things that people wouldn't even share, for example, if they went to couples therapy, because even that doesn't feel safe enough in the safety of the crowd.
So you're defending the programme or not?
No, not at all, because I feel that although that was the original rationale and may provide an explanation as to why some people might go on it,
yes.
I do feel that a lot of the issues these days, I mean, it's turned into a bit of a circus.
Well, it's always been a bit of a circus, but how would we decide who shouldn't? Because here are 100 people who really, really, really want to go on the programme. That's what emerges from the story of this chap, this poor fellow.
I mean,
some people maybe do get a little bit of cajoling or a little bit of pushing, but this fellow was desperate to be on it. If there is a case for arguing that he shouldn't have been on it, how do you tell? How do you decide who goes on and who doesn't?
Well, in terms of the outcome, the very unfortunate outcome of this man possibly being down to being on that show, there's nobody that could predict that. Any mental health professional will tell you, the best psychiatrist or psychologist in the world will tell you that even someone in active, regular, intensive therapy isn't necessarily completely safe. You can't say, oh, okay.
And
well,
is that in your view,
safe.
in your personal view, is that grounds for axing the whole show?
No, because I think that my understanding, I'm not intimately linked with the show in any way.
No.
I don't know the type of care that they provide. My understanding, from what you've said and from what I've read in the past, is that they do provide aftercare. But there have been several people who've committed suicide after having been on Love Island.
There's 2, I think, and ITV will be very conscious of that, very worried about that. Slightly different.
You know, I mean, it is very different, but who's to say that that was because they weren't able to cope with the kind of same agitation and criticism that arose from the show?
And also to go from being centre stage and in the spotlight to being back in the wings in the blink of an eye. I even, you know, speaking to someone who works in the media and who's had a little bit of spotlight, I suppose. I would find that very, very hard to process or understand. Depends how much you've enjoyed the spotlight, I suppose, or how much you value it. Sam, thank you. We're discussing the very, very sad death of a gentleman, Steve Diamond, who appeared on the Jeremy Kyle show 10 days before passing away, believed to be the result of an overdose. He had taken the show's test. He'd agreed to a lie detector test because he wanted to convince his then fiancée or his ex-fiancée that he had never been unfaithful to her. He was desperate to appear on the programme. They're not foolproof, these machines. I think the received wisdom is that they operate with about an 80 to 90% degree of honesty. But I bet you a couple of politicians could pass with flying colours while claiming, for example, that they'd campaigned for a no-deal Brexit all along. Some people just sort of seem to be made differently from the rest of us. And equally, some people who are telling the truth might activate the lie machine. But he really, really, really wanted to do it. And I don't know how you get past that. It is the thing that I have been most baffled by in broadcasting, because oddly, by complete coincidence, I work with both the Jeremy Kyle production teams and work next door to the Trisha ones as well, which was the programme that preceded. And the big mystery to me was always, why do these people I cannot imagine anything worse, genuinely. And the answer was always, it's a form of fame, it's a form of celebrity. And once you understand that, I don't know whether it's possible to police people's appearances according to their potential vulnerability. I just don't. And I'm not defending anything, although I will say that the people I know and have worked with who have also worked on the Jeremy Kyle programme are, to a man and woman, superlative professionals and excellent people. But I can see why you might think that the possibility of something horrible happening after such a potentially traumatic experience should wipe out the whole genre. I genuinely don't know. 12:37. Jeff is in Reigate. Jeff, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James.
Hello,
hi.
Jeff.
I heard that news this morning. I found it very sad. I mean, personally, whenever I flick through TV and see the Jeremy Kyle show, it makes me feel really depressed for society. You know, looking at the way that a lot of TV formats have grown over the last 20 years particularly, I mean, everything above the BBC with TV relies on advertising and sponsorship. And that comes from ratings, and ratings are often through formats that are about confrontation and controversy. But also, as the advertising and the sponsorship budgets have been reduced, TV execs have had to find new formats that are lower cost, lower production value, higher production value.
Jeremy Kyle's quite expensive to make, actually.
Yeah, but also that it brings in the great ratings. But when I look at it, I think it is very exploitative of people who know no better. You know, they've seen this rise of celebrity culture where anybody can be on TV without any
But
talent.
we never talk about Made in Chelsea like this, where people parade their most intimate details for the camera, but they do it in a posh accent and a smart postcode, and it somehow gets served up differently. Although The Only Way is Essex, actually, is similarly something that people aspire to.
Yeah.
Your average Jeremy Kyle contestant, if they have a desire to be famous, they're simply indulging the same impulse that leads people onto The Only Way is Essex or onto Made in Chelsea in the only ways that are available and open to them.
Well, I think the people that know no better, they go on the Jeremy Kyle show. With The Only Way of Essex and with the format for Made in Chelsea, it's very much just about people and their relationships. Yeah. That's all it is.
Well, so's Jeremy Kyle.
Well, it is, but it's also, you want people to go on there, and it's like, it is like the whole kind of idea of car crash television, that it's awful.
So's The Only Way is Essex. I think The Only Way is Essex and Made in Chelsea are the illegitimate children of Jeremy Kyle and Trisha.
Yeah, they probably are. I mean, if you look at the history of sideshows from America, when you talk about freak shows, it was the 1930s, wasn't it? Now,
I was reading about John Merrick at the weekend. Do you know that when I think he escaped, but he got to it was him when he was 14 that contacted an impresario that ran a freak show, the lad, the Elephant Man. He got it because that was the only way he could make a few quid with it in his
They make
condition.
a lot of money, absolutely. They lived together in Florida in a whole town. That was basically the alligator man would marry the bearded lady. They all were very much in the community, but they made an absolute fortune in the 1930s. So although they knew that people going on, pointing at them, they were very happy to do that because it is a fantastic way of life.
And this is different, but is it enough, in your view, to see the whole genre somehow banned from the broadcast media?
I think we need to be very conscious that actually it's not celebrating anybody's intelligence, actually celebrating people who have, in some ways, fallen through the cracks of society.
Look at the newspapers, though. Famous people have their dirty laundry aired in public on a daily basis. This is an opportunity for non-famous people to do the same. I'm not being the devil's advocate. I'll just read you one line. His ex-fiancée has given a very detailed interview to the Sun newspaper. She's called Jane. Jane Callahan. Jane praised Jeremy Kyle's team for their aftercare efforts. She said show representatives made repeated attempts to contact the dad of one after his appearance. She said they were brilliant. They were there when he needed help. They were really persistent in offering him help. Steve liked to be a comedian, and he could be very funny. He liked the attention. How do you stop him from getting on?
It's very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah,
and the one thing
it really is.
I do find Jeremy Kyle can really bully a lot of these people into a corner. They're so unprepared. It is very much looking
Again,
at...
I get told that. I get told sometimes that I bully people because they're unprepared. And you think, well, in my case, there might be an argument for it. If you're going to ring in claiming things that aren't true are true, then you're unprepared for how I operate. But these people have been put up in a hotel overnight. They know exactly why they're there. They've watched the programme a million times. They know what they're doing. I don't necessarily like it, but there's lots of things I don't like that I wouldn't necessarily want banned. And yet, for the record, I lean generally towards the notion that these claims about nanny state are dangerous. When you look at the obesity levels, the rising heart disease, you look at all the things that can be directly linked to the amount of sugar that's being poured down our gullets, often without us noticing, then anyone who stands up in public and defends the interests of the people profiting from the amount of sugar being poured down our necks deserves and must be countered. That's why I'm not this notion of libertarian or classical liberal, which is just sort of shorthand for idiot, really, in the current context. But this is different to me. And I'll tell you something else. I'm not going to name names because it wouldn't be fair. But a very, very prominent family, now up to their third generation of prominence. And you know the name, although I'm not going to say it out loud because it is a bit unkind. It's true, though. If you look at the marital and relationship history of one of the most famous and wealthy families in this country, not the royals, all right? If they were common, they'd be on Jeremy Kyle. But because they're rich and posh, they're in Hello magazine. It's 12:43. Joe is in Brighton. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Joe.
I feel very, very strongly about this. I mean, I've watched it on several occasions, and it just makes me sick to the stomach. And I saw an episode. Some of the stuff, like I believe what you're saying about the controls they have in place and everything else. But I've seen an episode where they bring a woman on who's suffering with serious substance misuse issues.
Right.
They lay bare on the show all the horrendous things she's done to her family and her neighbour.
Yes.
And then Jeremy Kyle comes along like a knight dressed in white shining armour, and they force her to go to treatment, rehab, when she's not ready. And I just think...
Do you work in the sector?
I do, yes.
Yeah,
and I just think it's the lowest form of entertainment, James. The lowest form. People with suffering with real issues.
Well, they're not here to counter, and I haven't seen the episode that you refer to, but I certainly don't doubt.
I apologise.
No, you don't. You don't have to apologise. I was about to say I certainly don't doubt your word and what I know of the programme.
There are several episodes that have been done along these lines, and it makes me to think if they can...
But isn't that just an intervention in front of the cameras? As I understand it, people with addiction issues, their friends, their family sometimes stage an intervention, the point at which everyone who loves them sits around them and says, you can't carry on like this. And I could probably make a case... Go on.
With an audience jeering.
Well, I was about to say I could probably make a case for saying that intervention becomes more powerful if it's done in front of a jeering audience.
I just can't. I agree with you on a lot, James.
Well, I'm not. No, this isn't a bridge I'm going to die on, Joe. This is not a bridge I'm going to die on. But just answer the question. Is there no argument for saying the more potent the intervention, the more likely it is to be effective?
No. There's also, if you look at the stats, coercive treatment, in as of itself, is not always that successful. But I just feel that laying someone's out like that for the entertainment of a jeering crowd and the public, I find it sickening personally, and I think I'm very, very pleased. Well, I would like to see the show disbanded, and I get what you're saying about the tabloid press and what they do. Two wrongs don't make a right, James.
No, I know, but banning stuff...
Just because it happens to rich people, it doesn't make it.
So, no, I understand what you're saying. They shouldn't be raking over the private lives of famous wealthy people in public either. But I guess if you end up with your extramarital affair on the front page of The Sun, you haven't asked to be there. You haven't applied, Joe. If you end up with your extramarital affair on ITV while I'm on the radio, so I don't expect anybody sensible to have watched it, you've applied. You've literally filled in the form, jumped through the hoops. Well, not literally jumped through the hoops, but you've literally filled in the forms. So even my own analogy, which you quite rightly questioned, turned out to be more powerful than we initially realised, because these people are doing it entirely through choice. And the tension between free choice and society or civilization protecting people from themselves, it's a fascinating question. I've got some phone lines free now. Things went a little bit nuts in the first instance, but it's 12:46, and give me a call if you just think it should be taken off air, especially if you've watched it a lot. I'm not going to tell you who the family is that I was referring to, but you could probably think of 3 or 4 that would fit into the category. If their relationship histories were replicated in a family from much lower down the socio-economic order, they'd be on Jeremy Kyle. As it is, they're I don't know, in Hello magazine in the House of Commons. It's 12:47. It's a horrible story. A man is dead 10 days after failing a lie test on a television programme, which has led many, including the people that make the television programme, to fear that there might be a link. That is why the Jeremy Kyle Show has been removed from air. I have no comment whatsoever upon the suggestion that's come in for a couple of tweets that 1 or 2 of the calls to this programme this morning may have been facilitated by the fact that Jeremy Kyle wasn't on telly. I shall leave you to work that out for yourself. But this line here is important. Jane Callahan went with Steve Diamond, I think, to the programme. Well, she did. She was part of the mechanic, part of the setup. And he failed the lie test. He was certain that he'd passed, apparently. She had discovered some dishonesty from him previously, but he remained committed to her and desperate to make the relationship work. And there he was. He did the lie detector test, and he failed it. He failed it. That's the interesting thing. They paid the doctor for a letter which was presented to the programme to establish his mental health. We went back to the doctor. The doctor said, you look fine and happy. Steve said he wasn't depressed and said we were trying to work it out. Then we paid for that letter to get onto the show. Jane praised Jeremy Kyle's team for their aftercare efforts. She said show representatives made repeated attempts to contact Dad of One Steve after his appearance. She said they were brilliant. They were there when he needed help. They were really persistent in offering him help. So it's not black and white. I thought it might have been when I first read the story. Howard is in Harley Street. Howard, what would you like to say?
Good morning.
Hello.
It's afternoon, actually. Sorry. Hi, James. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I actually work on many television programs, anything from reality to observational documentaries, including BAFTA award-winning projects.
Right.
And I think on reflection of what's recently happened, this tragic event, and, condolences to Mr. Diamond's family, there's ways of going about this. I would say with any television project, they shouldn't be exploiting risk. In any situation, if there's already a difficulty there, a program shouldn't be antagonizing that in the first place. And that's even if there is a project that's related to mental health difficulties. Even if you're doing a project that's about self-harm, the idea is to manage that sensibly so you're not antagonizing that in the first place. Part of my role when I work on television projects is to do these background assessments, support programs on their development process, to support them also with pre-care, aftercare follow-ups. Initially, it's about understanding the person's motivation. Why do they want to do this? What are they hoping to gain from it? And if somebody is purely seeking fame, that already raises a flag.
Well, then the show's off air. Under your analysis, the show never saw the light of day. And that may not be a bad thing in the great scheme of things or the great human tapestry, but just for the avoidance of doubt, that you would not go on this programme unless you were drawn towards the quasi-celebrity that it offers 15 years ago.
That would certainly be one of the questions. And then another question is, if somebody is vulnerable, how vulnerable, and are they able to offer clear and informed consent? Is their view, is their state of mind at the time already clouded?
Well, then that's why they sent the letter from the doctor to the programme saying that he was fine to appear.
The individuals that we see for a television programme...
I'm not sure you really are a clinical psychologist. Sounds to me like you're working in a canteen.
I'm actually on a break in between sessions.
Carry on.
But the idea is that actually, whilst a GP might know something about the individual, they're not familiar with the process of media production, the pressures that are involved in media production, and the aftermath. And that's why it's best to be seen by somebody who understands that. And there are people out there who say they do this kind of job, but really you should be qualified. You should be a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist, somebody who's registered under the HCPC or GMC, so that you know you've got somebody who has...
I don't know for sure, but I think they do. But it doesn't matter, does it? Because you're essentially taking it right back to source and saying the very... Because I would be inclined to agree with you, but do you know, you probably don't know this, Jerry Springer got interviewed by Jeremy Paxman many years ago on Newsnight, and someone's just sent me the clip of it. And what's fascinating about it, and I bet everyone thought I wouldn't be able to bring Brexit into this conversation, but I'm about to. What's fascinating about it is Jerry Springer's defence against exploitation was that these people never get heard anywhere else. How snobbish, how superior, how sneering is it to suggest that they should be denied even this platform, even this outlet for their thoughts and their feelings? And we often hear that that's why Brexit has happened. That's a pretty powerful argument.
I think there's something very important where some of the stories told on television are about validating an individual story because they don't get any other avenue to explore that. But that still has to be done within safe parameters.
Right.
And there should be an assurance that they can cope with that process and the aftermath.
Is there any argument, and this is a little bit crushing or clumsy in its framing, but it's 1256. Is there any argument for saying that the fact that a tragedy of this nature hasn't occurred before suggests that their checks and balances are effective? It's been on air for, I think, a decade and a half.
I am surprised something like this hasn't happened sooner.
Well, that doesn't answer my question. You might be, but doesn't the fact that it hasn't suggest that the checks and balances you seek might be in place?
Yes, I would agree with that. However, there might be other instances that we haven't heard about.
Yes, and things that haven't ended as tragically as... And again, for the record, it hasn't been established yet that there was a link between the television appearance and the subsequent death, which is as yet unspecified, undescribed. Howard, thank you. It was very helpful, very interesting, and it's just a horrible subject, isn't it? It's not. There is no silver lining to a story like this, but I do sometimes wonder that sometimes lynch mobs go after lynch mobs. Would be the best way of putting it. and there is clearly a case here for questioning what the programme's policies are with regard to potentially vulnerable contestants, but I'd refer you back to the words of his fiancée, which were incredible in there. Given what she's just been through, for her to state on the record they were brilliant, they were there when he needed help, suggests that the lynch mob going after what they think is a lynch mob may be doing more harm than good. I've got Israel in Manchester. I've got 40 seconds, but I gather you've had a ringside seat at one of these programmes, Israel, so fill your boots.
Hi there, sorry. Yes, I've been one of the audience members on the Jeremy Kyle show about two years ago.
Yeah.
And I just found his demeanour and his the way he would present the guests before they would come on to be very, very disparaging.
Yeah, but you get that from watching it on telly. You don't have to be in the audience to see that, do you?
And it's actually surprising how much worse it is before he actually starts the show, because I got that kind of vibe from him watching him on the screen. But then when you're actually there, I remember the comment he came out with saying that, oh, we have some real scumbags on the show today, guys. You're really going to love it. So he sets it all up, this environment for us to really...
I'm not going to argue with you, but what the heck were you expecting? If anyone who's even had a look at the Jeremy Kyle show, yeah, all right, maybe you weren't expecting that word. But the notion that intent wasn't there is a little naive, Israel. Maybe I've misunderstood you, in which case my apologies. It was necessitated by the brevity of our exchange.
ITV has axed the Jeremy Kyle show following the death of a participant. Steve Diamond died days after failing a lie detector test on the programme, which was never broadcast. ITV's chief executive, Carolyn McCall, said her decision was based on what she called the gravity of recent events. This afternoon, MPs on the Commons Media Committee announced that they would begin a probe into all reality TV shows to look at the duty of care they owed their participants.
ITV arguably bowed to the inevitable today and took the decision to axe the Jeremy Kyle show permanently. This was, of course, a direct response to the apparent suicide of one of its participants just a week after filming an episode of the show. But it was also perhaps a sign of the times. For a channel that invites viewers to come on in, the programme just no longer seemed to fit. More questions have been asked about a wider range of shows across all channels, and a House of Commons committee will look into the matter. But for a whole variety of reasons, all broadcasters will hope this was a one-off.
It was perhaps inevitable that the programme would meet this fate as the pressure and scrutiny only got more intense. ITV's chief executive, Carolyn McCall, said it was the right time for the show to end, given the gravity of recent events, and offered her thoughts and sympathies to the family. Following the announcement, a committee of MPs announced an inquiry into whether enough support is offered to guests on TV shows during and after filming.
Professor David Wilson worked as a psychology advisor on Big Brother in 2005. In his view, issues brought to the surface by this incident aren't exclusive to the Jeremy Kyle show.
Look, I'm not surprised at all by what happened on the Jeremy Kyle show, because frankly, people like myself and others who've been involved with reality television have been talking about these issues for the last decade, because it's conflict that creates the interest in the viewing public. Death was the next logical step to the kinds of conflict they were wanting to promote.
Look at you, he must be really proud of you being with his daughter.
The ripple effect caused by the shock end to this programme may be far-reaching.
Oh, I think anyone involved in reality TV will look at their shows today and say, look, are we sure we aren't pushing the boundaries too far? And if they think they are, they'll pull it back. They'll certainly give better support to the people who are on them. But I think Jeremy Kyle was an accident waiting to happen.
Do a drugs test right now?
For me, you and me, mates. Let's put this to bed once and for all.
Daniela Westbrook appeared on the celebrity edition of Jeremy Kyle. She thinks the end of the programme is a big loss to people like her in need of help.
He put me in a treatment centre that taught me, put me into PCP, and and they've taught me how to live again. They've taught me about the illness that I have, and if Jeremy was the only one willing to take a chance on me, he was the only person that would do that, and yeah, I owe Jeremy Kyle my life. And my experience and the way I was treated on the show is actually no different to theirs. The level of care that was given to me was given to them.
You failed the test. Why did you fail the test?
Reality TV has been a staple on our screen for years, but some who have worked on similar shows to Jeremy Kyle claim guests are lured with the offer of help, but the reality is often the opposite.
So the demographic of people who came on Trisha tended to be from very deprived areas. They didn't have access to services, they didn't have money for kind of counselling or therapy or anything like that. And they were brought on the programme with, as I say, with this kind of perception that it would be a helpful thing for them to do.
Jeremy Kyle was used to asking the tough questions, but now it's ITV and the television industry on the whole that has to answer them.
Well, earlier I spoke to the chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, Damien Collins, and started by asking him whether this was the end of this style of confrontational reality TV shows when there have been similar tragedies on other programmes.
Well, we've put out a call for evidence today, and we'd be really interested to hear from people that have been involved in making reality shows over the years and people who have taken part in them. And I think we're interested in, as I said, the duty of care towards people who took part, but also is the format of the show part of the contributing factor? Is the need to try and create moments of entertainment and drama for the sake of the ratings actually causing harm to the people that are in the programmes?
But is there a risk of being overly puritanical here? You know, 1 million people watched the Jeremy Kyle show and many enjoyed it very much.
Well, that's what I think it's a question of saying that we've had this tragedy, we've had former contestants on Love Island who've died as well. I think it's time to have a look to say, well, actually, what are the policies that are put in place to help people that take part in reality shows? They've freely chosen to do so, but they may not have fully understood the implications of taking part.
Do you think it's strange that ITV apparently has no plans to cancel Love Island?
Well, I mean, I understand it's a very different set of circumstances, and in the tragic case of the Jeremy Kyle show, obviously the person who took his life did so shortly after the programme had been made, and it was a different scenario with Love Island. So I think we need to look at different sorts of reality programmes. Our inquiry is not just an inquiry into the Jeremy Kyle show, it is to look at different formats of reality shows and see if there are problems there that could be corrected.
But obviously Love Island has rather more viewers than Jeremy Kyle's show, and there's been a suggestion of hypocrisy on ITV's part that it somehow can't afford to let Love Island go. 3.8 million viewers, I think.
Well, I mean, we will certainly be interested. We will certainly want to look at Love Island and other reality shows as well on different channels and see, what the standards are, how they're being enforced, what more needs to be done. And I think it's important that the kind of duty of care programme makers should have to members of the public who take part in these shows. It's not just about when the programme's being made, but for the period afterwards. And in some cases that may be, for a significant period afterwards.
Is it fair though that traditional broadcasters are being held to a much higher standard than social media companies, for example, which often have very large numbers of viewers and show things that are infinitely more disturbing than what gets shown on daytime TV?
Well, as you know, we've been pressing as a select committee for tougher standards for social media companies to make them responsible for harmful content on their platforms, to make them legally liable for it. That's something we pressed for in our inquiry this year, and I'm pleased to see the government's online harms white paper is for the first time setting out the framework for a regulatory regime for online companies, because I think you're right. We can't, in a world where people consume internet television and broadcast television through the same devices and don't really distinguish between the two, we can't have a world where one part of that content is heavily regulated and the other part totally unregulated. So it's important that we address the responsibilities of the social media companies as well.
Do you have any sympathy with ITV, worried about its bottom line, how it's going to attract advertisers if there is this newly sort of slightly puritanical mood in the country?
Well, I think it's a question of actually looking at this properly, which I don't think we've ever really done before. These programmes have grown in number, grown in popularity, and people have enjoyed watching them. Now we've had some tragedies, and I think our response to that has got to be to look at the way these programmes are made, look at what happens to the people who are part of them, and see what actually does more need to be done to look after their welfare and their interest.
Damien Collins, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can tell. So, what do you think? 03456060973. I have to tell you, I thought I knew a bit about it, and indeed I did. Some of the coverage has opened my eyes to elements of the programming with which I'm not familiar. I am repeatedly drawn to the comments of the ex-fiancée of the gentleman who died after failing a lie detector test on the programme, and her insistence that the aftercare provided by the programme had been exceptional. I also have a bit of experience of working in towards that end of television. It's a sort of odd mark of my checkered alleged career that I've done the very high-end stuff and I've done some quite low-end stuff as well, and I enjoy both. It's just the nature of the beast. One of the oddest things about British media is that it's very hard to be both. You would never, ever, these days, have somebody, obviously considerably more talented than I am, but if somebody were to be a latter-day David Frost, the current climate, the industry would struggle to accommodate someone who can do comedy and very, very heavyweight politics. You might get a slot on a show like Have I Got News For You? I think Ian Hislop's probably the closest to combining seriousness with comedy. Ian, of course, is the subject of my latest Full Disclosure podcast, if you want to have a listen to that this week. But actually, one of the things he says in the interview is he can't do long-form interviews, so as the interviewer. So I'm just sorry, I'm burbling a bit. I'm just pointing out that it's a little bit snobbish to presume, for example, that Jeremy Kyle couldn't have done more highbrow television. He's a very intelligent, very emotionally literate, very talented man. But the stories on the front page, I said to Ava this morning, they're toast. They're finished. You just get a sniff when you've been doing this for as long as I have of blood in the water. Now, whether or not it's a flesh wound or whether or not it's a mortal, gaping injury, once the blood is in the water, you get a sense of the sharks circling. And once the sharks are circling, it's very, very hard for management and production companies to batten down the hatches and hope that it will all go away. So it was the newspaper coverage today, Kyle on trial. TV Kyle ripped into my suicide father. Theatre of cruelty. 3 front pages. Jeremy Kyle's not to blame, says victim's stepdaughter. Daily Star swimming somewhat against the tide. But the 3 best-selling popular prints in the country all suddenly waking up to the nature of a programme that they've been covering for 15 years. Suddenly, apparently, realising what the programme is like. And that's the angle that I think we'll take together this morning. 10:07 is the time. 03456060973 is the number that you need. And what I'd like to talk about is freedom of choice. Former employees of the programme have been queuing up to paint extremely ugly pictures of what goes on there. I am human. I hope that doesn't come as a major surprise to anybody listening to the programme. And as a human, I think that I'm biased on this one because I know people that work on the programme and I really like them. Some of the nicest people I've worked with in television are quite senior on the Jeremy Kyle and have been quite senior on the Jeremy Kyle programme. And I think inevitably, however objective one tries to be, if you see your friends under attack, you react differently somewhere inside from how you would react if it was complete strangers under attack. I think it would be weird not to. You have to guard against it a little bit, otherwise you end up being one of those people who thinks if you have a personal connection with someone, then everything they do is forgivable. But it gives me a perspective, shall we say, on the relationship between choice and protection. When do people need to be protected from themselves? Okay? 03456060973 is the number you need if you want to answer that straight away. I will also today take stories about appearing on the programme, only I think first-hand stories or very, very close second-hand stories. It needs to be kosher, not speculative or hearsay, things you have experienced or witnessed yourself. And then the question becomes, how hypocritical is it of the print media, which exists, you could argue, to turn misery and unhappiness into entertainment? Looking at the Sun and the Mirror and the Mail this morning, and they're in their full-on sanctimonious mode. This is outrageous, absolutely disgusting. Now turn to page 17, where we'll be taking the mickey out of someone a little bit overweight on a red carpet at an awards ceremony last night. So I just find the commodity... Here's a phrase. I'd love to think I coined this phrase, but I probably didn't. The commoditisation of cruelty. Very much of our time. It's by far from unique to the zeitgeist. Used to be able to get ringside seats at beheadings and hangings, you know. People would fight for a deck chair down at Tyburn to watch some highwaymen get hung by the neck. Ladies would reputedly do their knitting in the front row at public beheadings during the guillotine, during the French Revolution. Like, the commoditisation of cruelty is everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And how much right do you have to expose yourself to that cruelty? Now, TV is a weird world. In a sense, you don't know what you're letting yourself in for. You see it as a viewer, and people on it sometimes don't seem real. I did this once myself, actually, many moons ago, when nobody listened to the programme. The only time I think I've ever appeared on the front page... Oh, no, I tell a lie. That was the New York Times. The only time I've ever appeared on the front page of a British red-top tabloid, as opposed to one of the world's most august organs, was when the footballer Frank Lampard rang into the programme after I'd used some quite choice words to describe his ex's description of their domestic arrangements. And I often... Well, not often, but I used to think about that quite often. And I fell into the trap of a showbiz journalist then, which I used to be. And when you're a showbiz journalist, you forget that people are people. They are just copy. You know? They're just things to be written about. You can see some incredibly callous and cruel things passing as utterly mainstream in the British media. You just think off the top of your head of some individuals who have been utterly crucified by the British media. I think of Christopher Jeffries, the mild-mannered academic who was essentially hung, drawn and quartered on the front pages of tabloid newspapers after a young woman who lived in the same building as him was murdered. It had absolutely nothing to do with him. You saw similar happen in the context of the Maddie McCann disappearance. There was one fella in particular who lived nearby who was almost convicted by tabloid, almost convicted by media. So journalists do it all the time. We forget that people are also real. You forget that their children are going to read what you've written. You forget that their parents are going to read it. You forget that their partners will. And what you generally ask the lawyer to do, this is one of the reasons why, A, I wasn't very good at this job, and B, I do not miss it. You generally, or you certainly 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you would ask the lawyer to tell you how far you could go. What can we get away with, as opposed to what is objectively true? And that to me is relevant to the Jeremy Kyle conundrum. Posh people queuing up to wash their dirty laundry in public would not, I don't think, solicit the same response. I think I'm qualified to say that Jeremy Kyle operates towards the lower ends of the socio-economic order. But if you had... Do you remember that fella on the telly not long ago who couldn't stop swearing? He was an aristocrat in a ramshackle old stately home. I've got the name Fulford somewhere in my head. I don't know why. And he was utterly foul-mouthed. He had the vocabulary of an illiterate navvy, as they used to say. I think I can say that, being of Irish extraction. If I can't, let me withdraw and apologise. He gets a reality television show because a posh person who can't go 3 words without swearing is hilarious and great value and worthy of a reality television show and an enormous cheque to fix the roof at his crumbling stately home. A poor person. You see this in far-right politics as well. You've got a chalk-striped suit and a public school education. You'll be on Question Time, 34 times. If you haven't, if you dress in Stone Island and your knuckles drag a little bit around the floor, the same people that put the other fella on Question Time will treat you like a pariah. So there's a class element to the Jeremy Kyle conversation that I would love to explore with you, but there's also a man who died. It would seem, I guess the conclusions must be that the death was linked to the appearance on the television programme, and is it the right decision? Or is it hypocrisy? Or is it both? It's both the right decision and astonishingly hypocritical. How free should people be to air their most intimate and humiliating secrets live on television. If I want to go on television and air my most humiliating secrets, should I be prevented from doing so by people who think they know better? That's the question I want you to answer. 03456060973. And if you've got an angle on it, an experience, an evidential angle, try and use it as a lens through which to address that question. So I will be Jimmy No Teeth, all right, today. I'm Jimmy Toothless. And I think my ex has cheated on me with my probation officer. Actually, the probation officer wouldn't be allowed on the programme. I want to go on telly and have it out with him and with her. It is almost certainly going to be an experience of unparalleled humiliation and horror, but I really want to do it. And I want to have a lie detector test as well. Should, at any point, and millions of people want to watch it. Crucial point. Millions of people want to watch it. Who steps in and says, no, you're not allowed on telly? And if I'm not allowed on telly, why is that effing and blinding aristocrat allowed on telly all the time? Have I got this right? Let's find out. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. If you're just tuning in, the Jeremy Kyle Show has been permanently cancelled by ITV following the death of a guest. So I'd like to welcome all Jeremy Kyle viewers to the radio show that you have been eschewing in favour of that television programme. Welcome. It's pretty much the same as Jeremy Kyle, this, just with longer words. And with that in mind, over to you. 0345 6060973. The tabloids were baying for blood, and they've got it. Jeremy Kyle as a television programme. The Jeremy Kyle Show is over. Is that fair, or is this an episode of media pearl-clutching and hypocrisy by precisely the corners of this industry that have commoditised cruelty on a scale that we haven't seen since Victorian freak shows? I don't know, and I'm on thin ice, because I've got a couple of mates who work on the programme who are really top people. So for me to sit here and dance upon the graves of their recent careers, maybe that would be the more honourable and honest thing to do, but right now I can't do it. So over to you. William's in Bolton. William, what can you tell us?
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
First time caller, a little bit nervous.
Don't be, it's only me.
Thank you. Yeah, my experience is of a mother, son and daughter-in-law who invited to take part on the Jeremy Kyle Show.
Right.
And before their appearance, 24 hours before filming, they were invited and checked into a 5-star hotel. Given
that's part of the appeal, isn't it? Is that you get a night in a 5-star hotel and you get kind of to live a little.
Absolutely, living a little. But if you've never had access to unlimited food, unlimited alcohol, where you can drink all through the early hours and then get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and film an episode of the Jeremy Kyle Show.
Yes.
Hungover, having had
I can speak. I can provide a little bit of experience here. Doing live television with a massive hangover is quite difficult. Carry on.
Of course it is. But they're doing it, I believe,
yes,
to bring the very worst out in people.
Because you're going to be short-tempered, you might lose your train of thought, you're going to be more likely to lash out, you're going to be cross and tired.
You're going to look horrendous.
You are,
as
yes.
well. Because,
but do you know what you've done? You've beaded in immediately upon the central tension for me here, which is, so people who've never stayed in a 5-star hotel shouldn't be allowed on the programme, but people who have should. Have you fainted? Wow. Have you fainted at the power of my intervention, or has the line gone down? Do you see what I mean? You see why I'm troubled? Because I think you're right, but then I say what I said, and you go silent for about 47 seconds, and the emergency tape nearly kicked in.
You should certainly, no matter what your class or whether you've stayed in a 5-star hotel before or not, yeah, sure, if you want to feature on a television programme. But the thing here is, these people are vulnerable. They come from a background of deprivation.
Yes.
They have difficult, challenging lives anyway.
They do.
Some of these people, you can just tell by looking. You can tell by looking if someone
Can you?
Has got health issues.
Yes. So now you're banning poorly people from the telly, but healthy people can go on. Crikey, you're quite the what's that word? You're quite the eugenicist, aren't you, William?
If someone has got black teeth and they're falling out,
yes,
they've got a dental problem.
They have got a dental problem, and I know exactly where you're coming from, and it is clear that the producers put an awful lot of effort into making things as provocative and as combative as possible. The security guards play a role in the programme. They have names but characters, if you like, in the story, and the fact that makes people like you and me view it in a slightly pantomimish sense is your point. It completely overlooks the humanity of the participants, but the systems in place do two things. They seek to safeguard against what you describe, while absolutely ramping up what I describe, the provocations and the short fuses, the fighting. And everybody knows what they're letting themselves in for. That's where I struggle to see censorship as being the answer.
I believe that they have targeted vulnerable people for over a decade. People are saying the aftercare, it's fabulous, it's absolutely amazing. Well, what about the carrot and the stick that's been used to make them?
One doesn't necessarily cancel out the other. What happened to your friends? I shouldn't let you go until you tell us what happened in their case.
In their case, it was a lot of dirty laundry that shouldn't have been aired in public.
And this is the point about priming them before they go on, is that we've all regretted saying something nanoseconds after saying it, and that is what they are primed to do, isn't it? So,
and I believe they deeply regret ever having featured on the programme, because it certainly didn't offer them the solutions that they were looking for.
No, and there are recorded cases of people being encouraged into rehab or alcohol treatment centres or trying to sort of be better parents. Do you know, there was an awful exchange. I only heard the audio clip. William, thank you. It was a sparkling debut. You can come back. There was an audio clip I heard yesterday of Jeremy Kyle really going after a guest for being a rubbish father and saying, you didn't know why, where were you? He was taken into care when he was 4, and that side of it actually was a little bit new to me. The moral judgments involved, rather than simply the spectacle. Because this father responded by saying, I didn't even know my son's name. And you sort of speculate then about the dysfunction and the disarray in his backstory and his son's backstory, and looking for a simplistic sledgehammer with which to smack him around the metaphorical head on the telly is arguably not going to help anybody involved in proceedings. I think I'm going to struggle today to argue against the programme being axed, in which case I'd steer you gently towards the observation about this being epic hypocrisy on the part of a tabloid press that exists largely to commoditise cruelty and abuse largely innocent people. But maybe I'm just seeing what I want to see. Richard is in Kenilworth. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
You're very welcome.
I'm not really a fan of Jeremy Kyle, and it's something if it was ever on the telly 5 minutes and it was off, I just couldn't watch it.
The radio was on, Richard. Good man. Carry on.
It was indeed, yes. But I, over the last couple of days, I've listened to the fallout of this programme, and I thought, if I give you a little bit of back history, my father, a number of years ago, took his own life.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. He was drug dependent and alcohol dependent, and also he had mental health issues.
Right.
And getting the right support was very difficult for him, to a point where in the end, he didn't get the support or couldn't get the support. There wasn't support. But anyway, when I watched the Jeremy Kyle show, some of the things I did see from it, he did get them to rehab. Yes. He did get people to look at their rock bottom, to accept the help.
They say in the therapeutic context that you have to reach rock bottom before you will seek help, and the way you describe it, he helped them get there.
I think so. I think it would be very easy to say, come out with the people that we've had, obviously this week a gentleman, or in the last couple of weeks, a gentleman's taken his life after the show, and there'll be lots of people who were very unhappy or their experience from the show. But I wonder how many life turned around. I wonder how many people have got proper lives that have got over mental health issues. And again, I'm not a supporter of Jeremy Kyle, but if I can make a really a main point, and it's a real simple one. If there was the correct support for mental health and this type of thing in this country, programs like Jeremy Kyle wouldn't be needed.
Crikey.
I
think we need to step back a little from the suggestion that everybody on the programme has mental health issues.
Sure, yeah.
But they'd struggle to make 5 hours a week, perhaps, without having some people sneak under the bar who probably shouldn't have got there because of mental health issues.
Well, I think I was looking at it from my own point of view, like from my own experience. But I mean, when I did see the programme, they've got that gentleman there called Graham, and I saw the way he would whisper into people's ear, pull them away, the support that they would get.
Yes.
And the other thing that
I know Graham. Graham is a lovely bloke as well. I mean, and he's there in good faith. He takes his work very, very seriously.
I think there was one show. It sounds like I don't watch it, but it sounds like now I do. But my work hours sometimes puts me on daytime TV, and I skip round. But I've seen where Graham, I don't know when it was, but Graham actually said, "No, stop, this is wrong," and directed the programme a different way. But I mean, the other thing from my point of view, when I would watch people going in those cars to rehab or wherever they would be going, and I think, God, it might have been very painful to get there. But getting into rehab, from my own understanding and my father's experience, was very difficult in the UK. And I think if your life can be saved, but for 15 minutes being a puppet to get to rehab, maybe the cost was worth it.
And good grief, I hadn't thought of that angle. And you are, very sadly qualified to explore it and to expound it, because in the absence of any other avenues, and the less money you've got, the less access you have to all healthcare now in this country, let alone mental health care, which is in absolute crisis. This is a rare opportunity for people who won't get any other form of help from anywhere else. It's a bit of a stretch for a lot of people listening, but not for Richard, because he's describing his own father's plight, which means I'm not going to argue with him. Thank you, Richard. Stephen Diamond, found dead on the 9th of May, a week after filming an episode of The Jeremy Kyle Show in which he took a lie detector test. The CEO of ITV, Carolyn McCall, who, my sort of sources tell me, has never been a massive fan of Jeremy Kyle, but is incredibly conscious of The Jeremy Kyle Show in its current form, but is incredibly conscious of the revenues and the viewers that it delivers. She said this morning, given the gravity of recent events, we have decided to end production of the Jeremy Kyle Show. The Jeremy Kyle Show has had a loyal audience and has been made by a dedicated production team for 14 years. I don't expect you to get your violins out at this point, but it's a very big production team, every single one of whom will now be wondering and worrying about their future and their livelihood. But that's by no means comparable to the suffering of Steve Diamond's family. Everyone at ITV's thoughts and sympathies are with the family and friends of Steve Diamond. The previously announced review of the episode of the show is underway and will continue. ITV will continue to work with Jeremy Kyle on other projects. And and actually, I should just read you this from the Sun newspaper, which was inevitably Kyle on trial, the front page this morning. PM deeply concerned, MP's call to act show, guest dead for days. A horribly brutal front page, a picture of Jeremy Kyle arriving at his home in Bermuda shorts, if you're interested. And then this from, let me get the date for you, because you know that I'm always keen to give you any available facts. Good grief. This is only from last week. Last month. This is the 25th of April, 2019. Jeremy Kyle, viewers were left gobsmacked by a guest's chip fork teeth on today's show. Sarah was on the show to confront her mum, Susan, for robbing her of access to daughter Aurora. Susan had become Aurora's legal guardian after Sarah lost custody of her. The 54-year-old told Jeremy that her daughter had been a bad mum and cared more about smoking cannabis than seeing her little girl. But Sarah disagreed and claimed her mother often stopped her seeing her daughter despite her having unlimited visitation. And there follows a contemplation and some social media repeats, like clips of comments on the rather unfortunate state of the mother's teeth, which are compared to broken chip forks. So the Sun reheats stuff that would only previously have appeared on social media. For example, Daz has said teeth like two broken chip forks, hashtag Jeremy Kyle, and Michael had nothing better to do with his morning than tweet, those teeth are nauseating, hashtag Jeremy Kyle. So the Sun was quite happy to drive internet traffic towards their own work, using the suffering, the plight, the mockery of a guest on Jeremy Kyle. That's all I'm exploring today, that odd tension between... I also like the class element, although that's partly due perhaps to my peculiar interests and enthusiasms. It's because they're poor, not very bright, it would seem, or certainly not very well educated, not in full control of their tempers and their moods. The argument is that they shouldn't be allowed to wash their dirty laundry in public. All right, I'm going to go all in, OK? Should Princess Diana have been allowed to do that interview with Martin Bashir? Should she have been protected from herself in that context? Or was she exercising her right to air her dirty laundry in public via the channels that were open to her, which would generally not be open to this poor woman with the broken teeth? So she's chosen to air her dirty laundry in public via the channels that are open to her. I think that's a pretty strong observation, but I look forward to you pulling it to pieces in the next 22 minutes. Rachel can start. She's in Manchester. Rachel, what would you like to say?
Hi. Well, what I'd like to say is I think, I was about to use your phrase, washing your dirty linen in public, which is what we would at one time have called that. And I think it's really, it's stretching beyond the piece, saying it's altruistic to get these people on and help them with their problems.
Well, I just remind you, the man who said that was saying that in the context of his own late father, he could conceive of how it would have been beneficial. So
I think he's kidding himself, and I will say that I do have experience on this because I've lost a sister for addiction, and I have many family members with mental illness.
You could both be right. He could be right about his dad, and you could be right about your sister.
Respectfully, yes. He can have that opinion. And that's fine.
Look at me being all balanced, Rachel. It'll never last.
I know. It's amazing. I don't normally listen to you for your balanced opinion, James. What I would say is I think that I absolutely think it's the right thing to axe the show. I think it's, it's been a long time coming, this blood on their hands. It's now happened. They are using people's distress, ignorance, lack of education as entertainment, and I don't sit well with that. I think it is like the old freak shows in the bear baiting. There's a Billy Connolly sketch a while ago that talks about people seeing somebody dressed stupid in the street, and you're going along going, hey, everyone, look at that silly bugger, and talk to everybody else, you go, look at them, because it makes you feel good, because you're not stupid like that.
Everybody needs to feel better than somebody. That pretty much explains the toxicity of current politics, actually.
Exactly. You need to feel better than somebody else, James. But the thing that I would say is the actual Jeremy Kyle himself, and he acts this big man, and I think it's absolute. I can't watch it. It's like bullying. He acts like this big man. When he's got all his minders behind him, it gets right in their face.
I had the same minders a few years ago when I did a television show for ITV. So that's not.
He's got the minders on there. But you don't goad someone right in their face and then wait for the minders to come after you. He's goading them in their face because he knows he's more educated, so he knows he can use his words to humiliate them. Let's all laugh at them because they don't understand what I'm saying. He acts a big man in front of him to humiliate them, and he's literally goading them to be violent. And then all of a sudden, he wouldn't be goading them in the street, this Jeremy Kyle. He's made millions.
No, but Gary Lineker wouldn't be talking about football in the street either. I mean, there is a role that is played in. He wouldn't be goading them without his big bully boys behind him, is what I'm saying. Got his big bully boys behind him, so he's there goading him. How is that fair? Well, I don't know that I come that far with you. I understand exactly what you're saying, but the notion, and actually no, I can't argue with you because I haven't watched it enough. But he would set himself up in the blue corner and a guest up in the red corner, and if the guest in the red corner kicks off, then I can't remember the lad's name. He's one of the nicest, most gentle. They always are, these enormous human beings. He's one of the most gentle people you could ever meet.
One of the guys who does it. That's not the point.
No, I know it isn't. I'm checking with the context with you. So then things, when tempers start flaring, he gets protected from the flare up that he, in your view, has deliberately provoked.
He's incited, and he puts his finger in their face, and he's like, you do this, you this, that, the other. There's a guy recently, you might be able to help me, James. He's an MP, it's called Robert somebody, and I can't remember his surname now.
Yes.
He did a talk show like this.
Robert Kilroy Silk.
That's it, Robert Kilroy Silk. He was on the ones, the hypocrisy of it. Goading a guy who wasn't seeing what a bad father he was, wasn't seeing his kids.
Yes.
Turns out that Robert Kilroy Silk had a kid he wasn't seeing himself.
Yes, I do vaguely remember that. I can feel the lawyer's ears pricking up, but I'm 99% confident that I remember. I remember there was a daughter, I think.
I remember reading about this.
There was a daughter lurking in the back. Well, I mean, hypocrisy and on the part of presenters is one thing. I mean, for example, Des has just been in touch. So, James, in what way does your treatment on air of Leave voters differ from Jeremy's approach? I think it's disgusting, Des, to suggest that Leave voters are mentally vulnerable or in need of protection from themselves or indeed possessed of teeth that look like chip forks. That's the kind of derision of Leave voters, Des, that's responsible for so much division in this country, suggesting that you'd only vote Leave if you were mentally ill. That's absolutely disgusting. But Rachel, presenters, of course, assume in other media they can assume a role, you know? It's got a touch of the WWF about it. Obviously, but you're reminding us that the WWF has two actors, not one actor and one real person.
Yeah, and that person is vulnerable, and they're being, you know, they're having someone in their face who, look at, every time I speak to the telly, James, I go, look at you, big man, you've got all your bully boys around you.
You've got a problem with Jeremy. You've got a problem with Jeremy Kyle. This almost feels a bit personal.
He's made his millions, and good luck. He's made his millions, and all right, and I know you've got friends on the programme, and fair enough. That's a different issue. But this man, his family have lost this man forever. They haven't, but there's still no. I mean, make of the reaction from the ITV what you will. But his ex-fiancée was at great pains to express how much support that he'd had from the team and how much respect she had for that. But you're perfectly entitled to say, so what? It's like giving a sticking plaster to someone after you've chopped their arm off. That's what I mean. I'm going to stick someone in front of me and I'm going to bash the hell out of them, humiliate them. But after I've done it and everyone's watched it, I can pay for your treatment after, if that's all right.
Yeah, OK. No, I hear you. That's a really strong contribution. To be clear, your biggest bone of contention is the individual presenters' on-screen tactics.
Yes, I don't like their on-screen tactics, and I think, if you want to help someone, let's be honest, it's not altruistic. They're doing it for entertainment, like everything else. Like the other bad thing.
Well, OK, let me look. The Incorrigible FCA is one of my favourite correspondents. So he's crossed with my Princess Diana comparison. There's absolutely no equivalent to the human bear-baiting that happened daily on the Kyle show compared to Princess Diana's interview about her marriage. It's a ridiculous comparison. It might be. But what about...
I know what you're saying from it, but she chose to do that.
Well, everyone on Jeremy Kyle chose to be on it. Martin Bashir would have put a lot of work into persuading her to do it. There'd have been phone calls in the middle of the night. There'd have been promises and cajolings and all sorts of...
But Diana was a well-known manipulator of the press, wasn't she? She had her own ways with the press. That's a different thing.
Possibly.
And she had the intellect to do that as well, which these people don't have. They're offered, like you say, a 5-star hotel and some cash to smooth the waters and that, and they do it.
I know, and you make an almost irresistible case, and some go some go further. Toby Foster's tweeted to say, I think he's a presenter in Sheffield on a radio station. He says Parliament and Fleet Street cannot talk about Kyle. They created the atmosphere that invented him. I'm closer to that conclusion than to yours.
I absolutely agree what you're saying about the press being hypocritical, but that's not news. We know that, don't we? I'm not going to look at the press headlines and they're going to go for him now because it can smell blood.
Did you? Have I misremembered, or did you 5 minutes ago say you were feeling nervous because you hadn't been on the show before?
No, that's not me. I'm on this.
Oh, thank God for that. I was about to say you should be applying for my holiday cover. It's 10:45. Let me remind you that the number for the Samaritans, if any of the issues that we've discussed on the programme today or any of the callers have brought things to the forefront of your mind, then the Samaritans are always there to help. 116 123. I've learnt a lot about the Samaritans second-hand via someone I'm very fond of, who has relied upon their services a lot over the last couple of months. Only found out about it at the weekend, and I am going to find a way of helping to support them in the coming weeks. I'm also going to draw your attention a little later in the programme, you must remind me, to a petition that's been put together by Fegan Murray. You've met Fegan. She is the mother of Martin Hett, who died in that terror attack in Manchester, which a caller on the programme referred to yesterday in slightly unfortunate circumstances. But Fegan's mission at the moment is to improve security at such venues, at such concert sites. Do you know something? Don't laugh at me. I can see threads between the three things that I just mentioned there. The Jeremy Kyle stuff, the Manchester terror attack, and Fegan Murray's mission, because her petition is incredibly unpopular. Well, incredibly unpopular. Her petition is not doing anything like the numbers that it should be doing. Because if you think about it, if a mother stands up and says, my son died in the Manchester arena, this is a petition to introduce security measures that could save your children from a similar fate. And it doesn't, in modern Britain, it doesn't get the attention or the amplification that it would get if it was an invitation to attack someone. If it was an invitation to feel anger or negativity towards someone, a petition calling for someone to resign. That's why the second referendum petition was so against the run of play. That there is no victim or victimisation involved in saying let's have even more democracy than we've already had. But Fegan's struggling to get the numbers, struggling to get the signatures. She doesn't know I'm doing this on the show today, by the way. So I will, if you want to go and dig it out yourself, do so. I will draw your attention to it properly a little later in the programme, and I'll certainly be tweeting it from my account. If you don't have to follow me. You can just go to @MrJamesOB a little later and look at the links there. But that speaks of the world into which Jeremy Kyle slotted very neatly. The world where unless you're getting cross about something, unless you're being encouraged to direct your ire and your disapproval at someone, then you're not going to get the numbers. What do I always say about the difference between selling tickets for the ghost train and selling tickets for the Speak Your Weight machine? It's a strange state of affairs, really, when a mother seeking to improve security at venues up and down the land after losing her own son in a terror attack struggles to get attention, and yet you put up some petition about far-right agitators encouraging you to hate all brown people, then they'll get numbers galore. Maybe a stretch to suggest that some elements of the Jeremy Kyle programme fit into that zeitgeist, but I'd stand by it. 10:52 is the time. Ian is in Lambourne. Ian, what would you like to say?
I had a friend who went on the Jeremy Kyle show 3 years into its run.
Oh, yeah.
And she was, I spoke to her last night, and she was saying last night they've got to take off there. I'm glad they have. I think poverty porn, there is a class element within the show.
Well, inevitably. Let's explore that a little further. What was your friend like? I mean, in terms of, if you don't mind me asking, in terms of socioeconomic status and education.
Where she works in a shop. She still does. I think possibly 2 or 3 levels.
Right.
Probably, and she won't mind me saying this. I'm dyslexic. She's dyslexic.
Yeah, fair enough.
We went to school in the 70s where people like us weren't supported.
You got left behind. You got stuck at the back of the class and told to play among yourselves, effectively.
Yeah, we got let down.
Yes.
But she's absolutely distraught. I wanted her to ring up the show. I texted her, but she's not able to. She's absolutely distraught.
You just did what the producers do.
What do you mean?
You tried to get her to come on air when she didn't want to.
Well, I mean, I didn't know that she wanted to until I asked her.
Fair enough. No, I'm being a bit facetious here. Yeah, so what was so horrible about her experience? What was it?
She was damaged as a child. She absolutely believes that a lot of the people that that went onto that show were harmed and were traumatized in some way. Because do people normally go into a public area and start talking about the most detailed personal things of their lives? They don't. There was something about it that he tapped into, and he's a vile man, and I think he's a monster.
Well, you don't know him. His television persona might repel you, but he's got children, he's got people listening that love him. I don't know if you can go that far. Although I'm being a hypocrite now, aren't I?
Do you know what? That's not technically true.
No.
Okay. To go to make your living off of the back of other people's pain, all right, there's something rather sadistic about it.
So why are we all waking up to it now? You've known about this for years.
I've known about it for years. It's a program that I've watched once in a while when it's been on in the ward, and I've been watching it from the background.
Excuse me.
Sorry, go on.
Do you think I'm doing this for my own entertainment every morning, Ian?
I think. Do you know what? I'm a convert for Radio 5 Live to LBC.
Oh, better late than never, mate. Better late than never. All right, carry on.
It's fantastic stuff. I go to sleep listening to it.
Go on.
But
at night you go to sleep listening to it, not at 10:55 in the morning. I hope.
No, not at all. But the thing is,
You know, how many people, we're listening about this poor, tragic individual now.
We are.
How many other people are out there that were harmed by the actual process of this show?
Well, they're queuing up to tell their stories to the newspapers, but you never get, no matter how many stories you assemble or how upsetting they are, you never get past that freedom of choice point, do you?
No, you raised an issue about Lady Diana. You know, Lady Diana, I'm a mental health nurse, and I went into mental health nursing very late, but I'm a mental health nurse, and I think Lady Diana was incredibly vulnerable, and I think she was hounded by the press, but I think she went for the lesser of two evils.
So she needed an outlet for her account of events, because other accounts of events were halfway around the world before she got her proverbial trousers on. Ian, great call. I am on something of a hiding to nothing this morning, but I'm always happy to take my medicine when you feel that I should. Warren is in Camden. Warren, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. So essentially, it's just more about the tactics that they use. Okay. So I don't want to go into too many specifics for like people being able to identify it, but the story essentially would have been some of my family were invited onto the show, and it was regarding a family member who had passed away from cancer, and their ex wanted to invite the rest of the family on the show, and this would have, I assume,
it's a custody issue, was it, broadly speaking?
There was something involved with that, but that wasn't the core issue. It was more about
they wanted the people you know very well, family members you have. They wanted them to be airing their dirty laundry in public. That's all we need to know.
Yeah. So and it's obviously, as I said, it was a family member who died of cancer. A very sensitive subject, you know, something that's obviously going to shock the whole, rock the whole family. But we were told from some of my in-laws that they were called, and the way that they were trying to invite us onto the show was just really reprehensible. It was they made it seem like such a fun time. Like, oh, come onto the show, we'll book you into a hotel. And they were speaking to women as well, so it's like, oh, we will book you into some spa sessions, and it can be a nice day out.
Forgive me, why is that reprehensible? They've seen the programme, they know what it's like, and the inducement to come on it is you get a night in a 5-star hotel and a massage and a foot rub.
And that's the issue, though, James.
Is it?
That
there's snobbery here, and I mean being an inverse snob. You're being honest and sincere, and I'm not arguing with you. But I am simply balking at the notion that people from a certain type of background can't work this stuff out for themselves.
I'm from a working class background. I grew up in a council flat. So did my family. So I'm not casting dispersions against people from lower classes or anything like that.
Yes.
But what my issue is that the focus is being put on the day out rather than what is the core reason for people being contacted, and it's because they want you on the show to talk about your story.
Yes.
That is the core reason behind all of this, and yet the focus is purely put on, have a great day out. Don't think about the serious death issues or the fallout from this, or
So when at the top of the show, I don't know if you were listening, I said the danger is when you're in the industry is that you forget that people are actually people rather than props or copy, as we used to say. The people that you write about, they cease to be fathers, mothers, children, and we're all guilty of that. All journalists are guilty of that. Thankfully, I don't think I'm guilty of it in this job, but I have been guilty of it in previous jobs. And that's the point, is that from where you're sitting, they did not treat these people like human beings with feelings and histories and families and sensitivities. They treated them like props and performers on their own stage.
I think that's definitely understandable. I mean, it's similar to doctors in the sense, you get desensitized to the issues and, you have to kind of cope with it how you do. But there's a difference between doctors and people who are primarily, there's a difference between journalists and people who are primarily creating an entertainment show, because I think that is obviously going to be the core focus of the Jeremy Kyle show.
We made that point repeatedly yesterday, that it is entertainment, although that distinction, when you look at the red top tabloids, becomes blurred. They have no bones at all about dragging guests from the Jeremy Kyle show all over their own pages and websites, and inviting and reprinting and amplifying comments, very cruel and unpleasant comments made by viewers of the show. No problem at all doing all of that for clicks and giggles. But of course, when the lynch mob moves, they join it, always. Arguably, they lead it. Warren, thank you. It was a great call. I've got a great hour, actually. Thank you. I think I'm wrong on this, but as Wayne points out, I've got an emotional connection with some of the people involved, and that always makes pure objectivity close to impossible. An executive decision has been taken to take a few more calls on well, just me and Ava had a quick chat during the news, and she said there's loads of people who are really interesting waiting to contribute. So we'll listen to 2 or 3 of them and then move on to something else. And what we will move on to is probably the news from America that Handmaid's Tale is turning into reality. 25 white male right-wing politicians passing laws that would forbid women from having control over their own biology and bodies in the case of them getting pregnant, even by rape or incest or both, of course. And I, as a white male liberal, the one element of fascism that I struggle to get my head around is the subjugation and oppression of women. Because you can understand the rest of it, the othering based on sexuality or skin colour or even religious faith. You can understand how you get insecure, often angry people on your side by giving them a target to hate. But it only works, in my mind, if it's a minority. So I've never really understood the fascist playbook when it comes to women, when it comes to the subjugation and the oppression of women. And you look at a book like The Handmaid's Tale, or indeed you watch the dramatisation on television, and it sort of makes intuitive sense. Of course they want to do that. But it still doesn't make intellectual sense to me. Partly because I can never get my head around the idea of a man who doesn't crave love, whoever it's from. He just craves chattels, belongings, ownership, even of his own wife. Because I'm pretty sure, as I look at both Northern Ireland and the deep south of America, I'm pretty sure that support for no-choice legislation is born of the fact that it enslaves a woman to her husband or to a man, historically. You know, we discovered when, I say we, I'm turning into Prince Charles, I discovered when I was writing my book about rape within marriage being a relatively recent legal development. I think as recently as the 80s, you couldn't be convicted of raping your wife because judges and the House of Lords considered, well, of course you can't, she's your wife. Even if she says no, you're perfectly entitled to have sex with her. That view is not dead, but far from it. It's just sleeping, like all the other vile views that currently animate British and American politics. It will come back, and the reason why it will come back is that if you change the law regarding rape and abortion, then you undo contraception, and contraception liberated women from the yoke of being permanently pregnant or feeding babies. In other words, being permanently under the thumb of their menfolk, their husbands. And you only have to look at some of the pronouncements of people like Mike Pence and other prominent supporters of Donald Trump to see a degree of enthusiasm for the days when a woman's role was essential. In fact, you don't even need to hop over to America. A woman's role was essentially just to breed and feed. And I, as a man, find that impossible to understand. But I haven't got a better explanation for why certain types of politicians and people are in favour of banning women from having terminations. And if you're going to talk about the sanctity of life, I will give you a fair hearing, but I will ask why all the politicians that are in favour of banning women from having an abortion are not in favour of doing everything humanly possible to help actual living children who are fleeing war or famine. I think of some Conservative politicians who have gone on the record being opposed to abortion, while simultaneously cheerleading, of course, for potential Conservative Party leaders who have paid for their mistresses to have abortions, but that hypocrisy can be parked for the time being. It's more how you can vote not to take in refugee children while simultaneously claiming that you'd vote to ban abortion. At what point does life become cherishable? Oh, conception. Oh, okay, so at what point does life become negligible, something that you'd vote against helping a human life? Oh, birth. So they're all in favour of protecting, quotes, life, end quotes, as long as it entails punishing a woman for being pregnant. They're not in favour of protecting, quotes, life, end quotes, when it actually involves helping a child who needs help. Yeah, we'll definitely get stuck into that a little later. Back to Jeremy Kyle for the time being. I don't think he's ever tackled that particular issue from this particular angle, but I'm open to education as ever. Amanda is in Hornchurch. Amanda, what would you like to say?
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Well, I thought being called interesting. I hope I am.
Carry on.
Anyway,
she might not have meant you. She might not have meant you. She might have meant the next fella.
Well, I thought I'd say that perhaps I think it's unfair that it's not for directors solely at poor Jeremy Kyle. I mean, obviously what's happened is terrible, but there are other shows that are a lot worse. There are shows before him that might come after him.
Yes.
Trisha and many others.
I don't know that Trisha was worse. I think a decision was made, and I knew the production crew there as well. It's almost I've spent my entire career next door to the studio where these programmes are filmed. But I think there was a conscious evolution from Trisha towards something altogether more raucous and confrontational with Jeremy Kyle.
Yeah, well, there are others obviously in America that look worse, it's a different country. But also, I was mentioning earlier to your young man who. Well, sorry about the X Factor that I went for a while ago.
I'm just going to send you back to that young man and improve the quality of your phone line, Amanda, because I'm only picking up about one word in three, and either I've got tinnitus or there's something wrong with the phone line. We'll find out in a minute. Don't tempt fate, James. Simon is in Grimsby. Simon, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. I was just listening to your radio, and I needed to phone you because I was in the army and ended up in a psychiatric hospital for 6 months after attempting suicide. And listening to about the Jeremy Kyle story, it's really hard to explain, but when you go on the show, you have to take a bit of responsibility yourself for what you... It's been going on for 14 years, and everybody knows what happens when you get on the show. Do you know if you're a bad dad, you're a bad mother, or whatever, he's going to round up on you and he's going to give you all hell. And it's been happening for 14 years. So when you go on the show, you have to take a bit of responsibility yourself to know that that's possible, that what's going to happen to you. Do you know? So...
I do understand that. I'm surprised at that. When you mentioned your own illness, I wasn't necessarily expecting you to go down the direction that you did go down.
Yeah, it choked me up a bit, that, actually.
I can tell. Good for you for talking about it. Take it from me that it helps millions of people. The more men like you talk about issues like this, the sooner, hopefully, we'll be living in a world where suicide isn't the largest cause of death among men under the age of 50. But the argument, or at least the conversation, I think recognises you must take some responsibility for yourself, but it also introduces that slightly troubling question of where the line is between protection and personal responsibility. And almost every other caller has contended that this programme exists on the wrong side of the line. It exists only by encouraging people to do stuff that they will regret immediately afterwards. And although you and me can say, well, it's hardly going to come as a surprise, there's about 10 million episodes on the iPlayer or on ITV Player, there is still a unique experience involved in being persuaded or cajoled or compelled to do something that you immediately regret, like a drug pusher, perhaps, in an illegal context. We've all got personal responsibility. But if someone sitting next to you is telling you that if you just smoke this or inject that, you're going to have the time of your life, it's not addictive, it's going to be brilliant. You've seen all the literature, you know the score, you've seen addicts. But are you still as personally responsible for your actions as you would be if that person wasn't there whispering in your ear?
I don't know. I just find it hard to put all the blame onto the show.
Yeah,
I really
do.
When it's been going on for 14 years, it's not a great surprise.
No,
and you've got all these people coming out of the woodwork now, going on about how bad it is and all. It's been happening for 14 years.
And of course, when it's the newspapers coming out of the woodwork days after they were quite happy to publicly traduce and malign a guest on the programme for the state of her teeth, let alone her personal life, then it's hypocritical on an epic scale. But tabloids are epic. Tabloids are going to tabloid, aren't they?
The British press and the British people are doing exactly the same thing now to Jeremy Kyle as opposed to what Jeremy Kyle was doing to his guests.
Except no one would describe him as vulnerable yet.
No, not yet, no.
So you wouldn't have pulled it? You would have been happy, not happy, but you would have been comfortable to see it.
I mean,
stay
personally,
on
I don't watch it.
No, I get that. I get that.
Once in a blue moon, it's on. But I don't think it should have been pulled for that one reason. Do you know?
Well, do you know? It's interesting. I mentioned that I'd heard whispers that the chief exec of ITV was not a massive fan of the programme. She doesn't control the schedules. That's the director of programmes, who's one of the most talented people I've ever met, a chap called Kevin Ligo. But often in this game, if the brass do want to pull the plug on something, deep down, then an opportunity like this lets them. If they were married to the project, if they loved the show, they wouldn't. It's it's a bit like me. If I had an Ofcom breach a few years ago, that's a sackable offence. I think. I haven't checked. I'm pretty sure it blooming well should be. If it isn't, they've missed a trick. But if they don't actually want to get rid of you, they won't. Unless it's an egregious offence. If they're looking for a reason, if they think, why the hell did we give him a 30-year contract? Why the hell did we give him this, that, and the other? Or management changes and a new management wants to get rid of you and you're protected by a contract with the old management. The decision isn't, this is a great point Simon raises, the decision isn't necessarily based solely upon today's evidence. It could be based upon the previous attitudes and opinions of the top brass of the management. I've hit the break now, so I will take Amanda's call after the break because she was kept waiting and then put back in the switchboard, as it were, and then we will move on to something else. But I'm not going to conduct a phone-in in the old-fashioned style about abortion and women's rights. I'm going to look at why it's historically an absolutely crucial, key platform of far-right and fascistic ideology, because the subjugation and oppression of minorities, the persecution of sexuality, ethnicity, and even religion, creed, I understand that. Possibly it's because I'm enslaved to the memory of the Nazis, and the Nazis didn't specifically go after women. They only went after minorities. So why does the fascist playbook almost always, go after women, the only target of oppression and subjugation that cannot obviously be described as a minority? It is Martin's Law, of course, that Fegan is calling her putative legislation that would see concert venues, public venues, rendered safer. I mentioned to you earlier that I can't. I mean, it's a horrible thing to reflect upon. But if I set up a petition now calling for someone to be sacked or publicly lampooned or stuck in the stocks and abused, I presumably would hit 1 million by tea time. Fegan is trying to improve security at concert venues after being staggered to learn how lax it was in the aftermath of her son Martin's murder by the Islamist terrorist who blew himself up at the Manchester Arena. And I'm delighted to tell you the Manchester Evening News, which is at the very vanguard of local journalism, like the Yorkshire Post, absolutely stone-cold, important and essential organs. The Manchester Evening News has come out in full support of Fegan's petition, and I would genuinely urge you to sign it. So if you head over to Twitter at Mr. James OB, you'll find me, or go to the Manchester Evening News website, or do whatever you can just to find it. Go to Fegan's Twitter account at Fegan Murray, FIGENMURRAY. But hand on heart, you can't not sign this. How can anyone not want concert venues shown to be vulnerable rendered more safe? And if we can call it Martin's Law, what a apt and fitting way to commemorate the loss of Fegan's boy, Martin Head. I really, 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 really want you to sign that. I might not let you carry on listening to the programme until you've signed it, actually. So head over there now and sign it, and I'll wait. I'm only joking. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. Right, back to Amanda for the last word on Kyle Gate. Amanda, where were we?
Hi, yes, I was saying there are other programmes that also use the public for entertainment, and I was going on to talk about the X Factor and other reality TV shows like that.
Cruelty, isn't it? We are encouraged to laugh at people who probably shouldn't be in the fish tank.
What they don't know, maybe people at home, is that before they go on in front of the judges, they go through about 3 rounds before that, because I went through it myself. And they obviously just filter out all the people in the middle. They let the good people through and people they know that are going to be great public entertainment. So these poor people get through all these rounds thinking they're really good and then go on and get...
Hasn't it got better recently? I mean, certainly, a pal of mine was actually in Love Island at the last series, and there was a conscious shift on... Not Love Island, I beg your pardon, the jungle one, I'm a Celebrity. There was a conscious shift away from cruelty on I'm a Celebrity last series. There wasn't someone who was bullied like Ian Lee was in the previous series, or some slightly sort of unsavoury characters getting a lot of camera time. It might be a broader truth at ITV, but is X Factor still... You'll forgive me for not being plugged in fully to these programmes. I'm not being snobbish. I'm just
things like X Factor and Britain's Got Talent, where they still put
what you might call somewhat vulnerable.
Okay.
Yes. And what happened to you?
I don't know. Oh, I couldn't make the next round, so I'm hoping I got through what I did because I was good, not because when I'm
How would you know?
People are going to laugh at. I'll never know, I suppose.
And that is that. So, I mean, this is the apotheosis of commoditising cruelty. But if you're going to start calling out every example of it, then British television is going to lose 60% of its current content, almost all of its entertainment stroke light entertainment content. I hadn't thought of that. But again, it's about scale, isn't it? So you know what you're letting yourself in for the X Factor. The worst thing you can do is make a prune of yourself on national television because you're not actually as good a singer as you thought you were. You're not having your parenting or your mental health or your lifestyle choices or your dysfunction or your disease or your illness or your vulnerabilities poured over for the entertainment of the masses. You're having your slightly delusional belief that you're the next Barbara Streisand. But it stands. It's on the same page, 22 minutes after 11. Thank you, Amanda. I enjoyed that conversation. I would be very surprised if it is not returned to by and with colleagues in the course of the day here on LBC.